Hello, just little old me again, back answering some more questions that were actually put to me via my last overhead press video. Obviously subscribers leave comments and sometimes ask questions, and I'm always flattered that they should think that I would be able to help them, because obviously I don't have much of a competitive history. I'm just some old bloke that lifts weights just for recreational purposes, but I've done it for a few decades and I've managed not to get hurt, and I'm still lifting reasonable weights, I think, in the overall scheme of things. One, I think he's a subscriber, called Javan King. He asks my opinion on several things. The first question was what mindset a person needs when approaching an intimidating work set, particularly a heavy double or triple, or to push their limits on a very grindy set. To that I would say that it's a combination of ingraining your technique, that the training you've done before that maximum attempt through many sets of low reps. The reps usually stop fairly well short of failure, but you're doing lots of sets and using physical cues, like your technique cues when you take the bar from the rack when you set up, and ingrain that over and over again, so when the heavy attempt occurs you've already been there thousands of times before. There's nothing really going to go wrong. You can almost do it blindfolded. The actual psychological part of that is the psych, which comes from the marshalling of adrenaline, which for most people comes from thinking of very intense emotions, whether it be love, hate, vengeance, something that's deep-seated in your mind that you just can't let go, that gets you fired up. Put yourself in a scenario where you've got to save your child and it's life or death, to get really angry, something that really triggers you. We all have things that it's stupid to even talk about, but just to get yourself psyched up. And actually, because you've ingrained your technique that much, you can do it almost on autopilot. That's what I would suggest doing. On the second question, he asks the benefits of using traditional compound lifts, such as certain paused squats, paused bench presses, dips, etc. Well, obviously, the first reason why you use barbells is because they're the most ergonomically friendly designed devices, really, to help a person like a humanoid frame lift weight. Obviously, the barbell's the right diameter that you can fit in your hand, and the weight over your centre foot when you stood up doing an overhead press or you're doing a deadlift or a row. So it's ergonomically friendly that way. You can use maximum weight. If you use an awkward object like a sandbag or a rock, you wouldn't be able to use enough weight. The big curl would be gripping the object. So that's why you use barbells, because they're designed specifically for that purpose. And obviously the exercise you mentioned, the pause squats and the pause bench press is very sensible, because when you lift raw, you're not using any bench shirts or anything like that. You've got to be strong from the hardest position of the lift, which is always at the bottom. On the squat, rarely do you get stuck, 3/4 of the way up. It's always at the very bottom where you're coming out the hole, as they call it in powerlifting. Or on the bench press, it's off your chest. An overhead press, you should be going full range of motion, like what you see me doing, standing at your chest. That's the hardest part. Once you get that moving, right, you've got the lift. So that's why you would do pause work. And actually the pause work is the key to actually longevity, especially over 45 people like me, even younger people as well, because of the actual need to be strong in a bottom position. But you can train more often if you pause in the hardest part of the lift, because it's not as compressive on your structure, because barbells do have an effect on your structure which makes them more actually useful than machines, as well as obviously the stabilizer muscles that are getting used. Most barbell exercises that you should be doing stood on your feet. Obviously bench press is great for your upper body, but I think overhead presses are better and push presses are better, because obviously you're stood up and it's more functional. You're getting more muscles into the lift, you can create more fatigue, and you develop that structural strength that you just can't get on machines. But that's not to say machines aren't useful, because they are very useful, but you've got to know when to use them to help move lifts forward. The other question was about how to incorporate Olympic lifts like hang snatches and hang clean and jerks as you get into the intermediate level of your strength potential. That I would say I haven't got much experience in, because I always thought that, well, I didn't think, but the reason why I lift weights is to build muscle and build strength, and the Olympic lifts are great, but they're very technical lifts, and if you're just some kid in a gym or some guy in a garage gym or a commercial gym, the instructors really won't be able to tell you how to do a proper clean and jerk. So you'd be learning it out of books or online, which isn't ideal. You need a proper Olympic lifting coach, which most people don't have access to. So I never actually did it, and I wouldn't really suggest you would do it at intermediate level anyway, for the simple reason, once you get to that level of strength and you're training naturally, you won't have the recovery ability left over when you've deadlifted and squatted or overhead pressed or all the other things that you do. You won't have the recovery ability left over to incorporate these lifts as a supplementary exercise, even because it's a lot of wear and tear on your lower back. It'll impede recovery for the big main lifts, which do build more muscle. Obviously I always go back to the basic barbell lifts. It's quite boring, but they work, and they have worked for well over 100 years. So to answer that question briefly, I would say I wouldn't even bother doing them. And that's not to say that they aren't any good, but if you're trying to build muscle and actual static strength, a good way to look at it would be most of the strongest, most muscular people in the world's strongest men, world powerlifters, don't do hang snatches and hang cleans, and there's a reason for that. It's because they interfere with your recovery too much. That's even if people who are using anabolics. I mean, if you're natural or you're using TRT, you can forget about including them and being able to recover if you're working hard enough on the big lifts. The next question was the numbers: 315 bench press, 405 squat and 495 deadlift. The time frames needed for the people who don't even have, perhaps ideally, we just any of them lifts, the time frames involved. And I answered a question similar to this on one of my last videos. If someone isn't structured ideally for the lifts, any of the lifts, then it's going to take a long time to achieve them numbers. But that doesn't mean to say that it's not the best way to train still, because you might be training with someone who has got good ability naturally at any of them lifts you mentioned, and they'll progress a lot quicker, and that might discourage the person who isn't doing so well. But you've got to always bear in mind that them lifts, the basic traditional barbell lifts, are traditional for a reason, because they've worked since time immemorial on putting muscle on people and making them stronger. So you still do it, but as for the time frames, it's entirely genetic in terms of the time it takes to achieve them numbers. It could be from months to years. The programming that you use is very important. Just by doing the lifts, you've got to do it focused. Whatever weight you do for whatever reps one week, you would try and do more the next week. It sounds very simple, but weightlifting was never meant to be really complicated. Life's complicated enough without making your pastime, like rocket science. So if you bench press 200 pounds for 5 reps one week, then you would try and do the 200 pounds for 6 reps the next week or more. Or you would maybe do several sets of 4 reps, stopping well short of favour and building more volume that way. So you're not actually hitting failure, because if you do like 4 or 5 sets of 4 reps instead of one all-out set of 6 reps, you've done more work overall, especially if you don't rest that long, no more than like 3 minutes between sets, which is the method I use. I don't really go to failure. The videos that I put out I go to failure on, but that's because I'm just showing off. But I don't do that all the time. It's usually well short of that, or even a lot less weight, but moving the bar more explosively. And that builds volume, and you're still exerting enough effort to cause an adaptive response over time. So when you do peak, you really can hit it, and that's when you'll know you're getting stronger, because each maximum attempt every month might be a little bit more than the last. That's how you keep gains moving forward on a year-to-year basis. Obviously, eating and sleeping and mastering the lifts technically will make you come on quicker. But the actual question, how long? I can't really say. It's very difficult. It could be, you talk about people who are naturally gifted. People like Bill Kazmaier or Andy Bolton who deadlift 600 pounds the first time they tried it. Obviously, you're probably not like them, so you might never even get to a 600 pound if you train for 20 years. But that doesn't mean to say that doing a deadlift isn't valuable, and it is better than doing any machine that you would find, any hack squat or any sort of seated row machine for your back or whatever, or any machine exercise can't come anywhere near a squat or a deadlift for actual overall returns for the effort you put in. The last question Jovan asked was concerning diet. Things like oats. Could he add in whole milk, nut butters, nuts, oats for quality calories? If to try and gain weight, I assume. In which case, I mean, obviously they're all healthy foods. Whole milk obviously has fat in it, but if it's sort of raw whole milk, which is what I actually drink personally, there's about 40% more nutrients in the raw milk than there is the pasteurised milk, with all the other growth factors in it, and I would recommend that over things like peanut butter. Oats is obviously a good source of carbohydrates, but if you ask me this and you want to gain weight, then I would say personally, in my opinion, always go to carbohydrates when you want to gain weight rather than fat, because there is evidence to suggest that if a person is trying to gain weight and the extra calories come from fat, like food sources of fat, then the actual you'll store more body fat than what you will with carbohydrates. People seem to think that carbohydrates make them fat, which obviously they can do, but you have to eat an awful lot of them if you're very active. If you're doing a manual job and you're going to the gym 3 or 4 times a week doing hard exercise, hard lift, then you'd have to eat an awful lot of carbs, purely carbs, to get fat. Whereas things like whole milk and nuts and whatnot, peanut butter, you can gain fat on them a lot quicker. It's not my opinion, that's scientific fact. But that's not to say that nut butters and whole milk isn't good, but using them entirely, obviously I'm assuming you don't want to gain a lot of fat, even though you might not be a bodybuilder who's concerned with having a low body fat level, you still wouldn't want to gain fat for any reason, I wouldn't have thought. So it's a good choice of food, all healthy, but you need to I would say if you're doing it to gain weight, you want to be eating more carbohydrates, keeping your protein, I think it's about 1 gram per pound of body weight, perhaps a little bit more. But if you're eating a lot of carbs, you want to be having about a gram per pound, and upping your carbohydrates and watching the scale. Obviously healthy fats, fish oils and whatnot. But to finish off that, the foods you mentioned are all great foods, so if you want to eat them, you eat them. I mean, it's not going to kill you. But I hope I've answered that question to your liking. If I haven't, just drop us another comment and I'll do my best to elaborate even more. I'm always flattered that people won't ask me questions, because like I say, I haven't got any real competitive history. I don't make YouTube videos to get people to ask me questions. I'm not setting myself up to be some like guru. I post videos for posterity, because obviously the age that I'm at, I'd like to record it to let, just for myself really, just to let that. So I've lifted these weights. I did it when I was younger, but there was no cameras on phones back in the 80s, in the early 80s when I started. So I'm just sort of trying to make it last as long as I can. So any questions, feel free to ask. I appreciate it. Thanks very much and have a nice day.